There's a strange, almost ghostly sensation creeping through the digital corridors of the artificial intelligence community right now. If you spend enough time prompting, testing, and pushing these models to their limits, you start to develop a sense for their specific vibe, a digital fingerprint that defines how a machine thinks and speaks. For years, that fingerprint was clear. OpenAI's GPT models were the assertive, direct, and sometimes slightly arrogant pioneers, while Anthropic's Claude models were the cautious, nuanced, and deeply philosophical scholars. But something fundamental has shifted. We are entering an uncanny valley of synthetic intelligence where the roles have suddenly, and perhaps intentionally, been reversed. It is as if the two companies reached a crossroads and decided to exchange maps, leading to a landscape where the tools we use every day have completely different souls. If you have logged into your developer console or refreshed your chat interface recently, you might have felt it. GPT-5.5, the latest powerhouse from OpenAI, is starting to feel remarkably like Claude. It pauses, it hedges, it considers the ethical implications of a request with a level of grace and nuance we have not seen before. Meanwhile, the new Claude Opus 4.7 has shed its overly polite skin. It is suddenly faster, more decisive, and carries a punchy, efficient attitude that used to be the hallmark of the GPT family. It is a total soul swap, a convergence of two titans that has left the tech world asking one core question: why are the two most powerful AI models on the planet seemingly trading personalities? To understand this mystery, we have to look at the architects behind the code. On one side, we have OpenAI, the aggressive pioneers who famously followed a scale at all costs mantra. They gave us the raw power that defined the early era of the AI boom. On the other side stands Anthropic, a company founded by former OpenAI members who left because they wanted to prioritize a safety-first approach, guided by what they call constitutional AI. For a long time, these two companies were like mirror opposites, operating from different ends of the spectrum. But today, with the simultaneous release and optimization of GPT-5.5 and Claude Opus 4.7, those lines are blurring into a single unified point of utility. This is not just happening in a vacuum. The rollout is global, spanning across developer APIs and consumer-facing interfaces like ChatGPT and Claude AI. Whether you are a coder in San Francisco or a researcher in Tokyo, the models you interact with are changing in real time. This shift is a calculated response to real-world performance. Both companies have realized that raw benchmark scores, those academic tests, only go so far. In chasing that sweet spot of utility, both OpenAI and Anthropic have discovered the same truth about how a high-level intelligence should speak. Think about it this way. If you have used GPT for years, you know its voice, but suddenly it is being careful and nuanced. GPT-5.5 is focusing heavily on agentic reliability, the ability to reason through multiple steps without human correction. It no longer just guesses, it contemplates. And Claude? It is suddenly faster and more decisive. Claude Opus 4.7 is aiming directly at coding speed and efficiency. The days of Claude being the slow, preachy model are fading away. It is a total soul swap. This is not a coincidence. It is a result of immense market pressure and user feedback loops. Professional users have demanded that GPT stop being so impulsive and that Claude stop being so hesitant. In obeying the market, both models are shedding their original identities. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We are setting the stage for a world where choosing an AI is not about choosing a philosophy, but choosing a brand. The nuances are vanishing, replaced by a hyper-optimized intelligence that feels universal. But how deep does this swap truly go? The history of OpenAI is one of relentless, uncompromising scale. From its inception, the organization operated under a singular belief: that if you feed enough compute and data into a large enough neural network, intelligence will emerge as a byproduct of mathematics. This scale at all costs mentality produced models that were undeniably capable, but they often carried a distinct mechanical coldness. In the early days of GPT-4, users described the experience as interacting with a brilliant but arrogant polymath, a machine that would give you the answer with absolute certainty, even when it was wrong. It was assertive, direct, and efficient, reflecting a culture that valued raw output over the nuances of human interaction. This robotic persona became the benchmark for AI, setting a standard for speed and confidence that the rest of the industry followed. However, within OpenAI, a philosophical rift was growing. A group of researchers, led by Dario and Daniela Amodei, felt that the pursuit of raw power ignored the fundamental risks of AI alignment. They broke away to form Anthropic, a company built on safety-first development. Their goal wasn't just to build a powerful model, but a trustworthy one. This led to constitutional AI, a training method where the model is governed by explicit ethical principles. The result was Claude, a model that felt fundamentally different. Claude was nuanced, deeply reflective, and possessed a human-like warmth. It was the scholar to GPT's engineer, but this safety-first approach had trade-offs. Early versions of Claude were often criticized for being overly preachy or prone to unnecessary hedging, sometimes refusing to answer simple prompts because they touched on perceived ethical boundaries. For years, this divide defined the AI landscape. You chose GPT for raw, uninhibited performance, or you chose Claude for safety and sophisticated prose. But as the technology matured, a harsh market reality began to set in. Professional users, the coders, researchers, and corporate executives began to demand a middle ground. Developers using GPT-4 were growing tired of its occasional arrogance and its tendency to hallucinate under pressure. They wanted a model that could admit its limitations and reason through problems with more care. On the other side of the fence, the Claude user base was becoming frustrated with the model's speed and its habit of lecturing the user. They wanted directness. They wanted the machine to stop apologizing and start delivering code. The unique vibe of each company was becoming a hindrance. This friction birthed what experts now call convergence theory. The idea is simple but profound. As AI models approach the frontier of human-level intelligence, the room for stylistic variation naturally shrinks. There is an objective best way to solve a complex logical puzzle. Write a clean Python script or summarize a dense legal document. When you optimize for maximum real-world utility, you inevitably strip away the quirks and idiosyncrasies of the model's original programming. If two different models are both aiming for the same perfect answer, they will eventually start to sound identical. We are seeing this happen in real time as both OpenAI and Anthropic refine their models based on massive loops of reinforcement learning from human feedback, where both companies are now using nearly identical ideal human response templates. The competitive landscape has accelerated this process. With Google's Gemini and Meta's Llama rapidly closing the gap, neither OpenAI nor Anthropic can afford to remain specialized players. They are both forced to become universal intelligences that can handle any task with equal proficiency. To stay relevant, OpenAI had to integrate the nuance and caution that made Claude famous, while Anthropic had to adopt the speed and decisiveness that defined GPT. They are no longer training their models to reflect a specific corporate philosophy. They are training them to meet the standardized demands of global productivity. And this is where it gets interesting, because the thing that made you love Claude is now inside GPT, and vice versa. The philosophical walls have crumbled, giving way to a new unified era of machine intelligence. As we examine the technical architecture of GPT-5.5, the most striking change is what developers are calling the Claudification of OpenAI's flagship model. For years, GPT was characterized by its rapid-fire, high-confidence output. It would deliver a solution with such conviction that users often failed to notice when it was hallucinating. But with GPT-5.5, that swagger has been replaced by a newfound sense of nuance. When you ask the model a complex question today, it no longer rushes to the finish line. Instead, it adopts a tone that feels remarkably similar to the early iterations of Claude, hedging its bets, explaining the underlying logic, and offering a softer, more conversational touch. This is not merely a change in writing style, it is a fundamental shift in how the model processes information and interprets human intent. The primary driver behind this transformation is the integration of advanced reasoning chains. OpenAI has moved beyond simple next token prediction, embedding deep thought loops into the core of the GPT-5.5 architecture. This allows the model to enter a contemplative state before providing a final response. If GPT-4 was an impulsive genius, GPT-5.5 is a deliberate scholar. It explores multiple pathways of reasoning internally, weighing different interpretations of a prompt. This shift makes it feel less like a traditional chatbot and more like a sophisticated agent capable of self-correction. In the global AI community, particularly on platforms like Reddit and Twitter, users are reporting a significant drop in the model's tendency to double down on errors. When faced with a prompt that is logically flawed, GPT-5.5 is now far more likely to reason and respond with a measured statement like, "I am not entirely sure about this part of the request, but here is how I would approach it." This willingness to admit uncertainty is a direct inheritance inheritance from the philosophical lineage of Anthropic. It represents a strategic pivot from raw confidence to empirical accuracy. In complex logic puzzles and high-stakes coding environments, this humble approach yields far better results. By acknowledging edge cases and potential pitfalls at the start of its response, GPT-5.5 effectively mimics the safety-conscious reasoning that once defined the competition. In the fast-paced world of Silicon Valley development, these changes were initially met with some skepticism by power users who feared a loss of speed. However, most have realized that accuracy is the superior metric for production. This isn't just about being polite. The shift toward agentic reliability is the real goal. For an AI to perform multi-step tasks, such as navigating a file system or debugging a large codebase, it must be able to reason through the consequences of each action before executing them. GPT-5.5 has been optimized specifically for these agentic workflows. It is a deliberate evolution. It no longer just provides the code. It explains the architectural choices it made and warns the user about potential compatibility issues. This level of contemplative reasoning was previously the gold standard held by Claude 3.5 Sonnet. By adopting this style, OpenAI is solving the chronic arrogance problem. The model now acts as its own internal auditor, checking for logical inconsistencies before the text ever reaches the user's screen. This brings us to the safety paradox. In the past, safety was often viewed as a constraint, a set of shackles that made a model more restrictive. But OpenAI has discovered that Anthropic's safety-first style is actually a performance multiplier for complex reasoning. By forcing the model to consider the logical implications of its output, it naturally becomes more rigorous. The result is a model that is nicer to interact with, but also fundamentally more reliable. It no longer collapses under the weight of difficult prompts because it has been trained to value the integrity of the reasoning process over the speed of the answer. As GPT-5.5 settles into this new, more thoughtful identity, it leaves behind its reputation as a robotic oracle, embracing a soul that feels eerily familiar to those who have long championed the Anthropic approach. This convergence is the birth of a more mature, reliable form of artificial intelligence that prioritizes success over the appearance of omnipotence. While GPT-5.5 was busy absorbing the reflective, nuanced qualities of a scholar, a mirror transformation was occurring across the competitive divide at Anthropic. Claude Opus 4.7 Once the quintessential safety-conscious philosopher has begun to undergo a radical evolution that many in the industry are calling the GPT-ification of Claude. For a long time, the primary critique of the Claude series was its tendency to be overly preachy or wordy. It would often wrap its answers in politeness and context, making users wait through paragraphs of fluff before getting to the actual data. But with the release of Opus 4.7, that skin has been shed. This new model is punchy, direct, and incredibly fast, adopting the aggressive, get-it-done attitude that once made early versions of GPT-4 a sensation among power users. This shift is most visible in the realm of coding efficiency. Developers who previously relied on OpenAI for its raw, utilitarian output are now migrating to Claude Opus 4.7. They have found that the model has traded its signature flowery prose for a leaner, more decisive approach to technical problems. It has become the go-to for boilerplate generation and complex refactoring because it no longer hesitates or over-explains simple functions. Instead of offering a lecture on the best practices of Pythonic architecture, Opus 4.7 simply writes the code, optimizes the logic, and delivers it with a speed that rivals the snappiest models on the market. It has adopted a functional decisiveness that was previously alien to the Anthropic lineage. It no longer waits for a perfect scenario. It builds the solution with the tools at hand, prioritizing the outcome over the explanation. In older versions, Claude was known for its constant apologies and its habit of being overly deferential to a fault. If a prompt was even slightly ambiguous, the model would often stop to ask for permission or express its humble desire to be helpful before proceeding. Opus 4.7 has largely abandoned this tentative posture. It now takes the lead in conversations, making executive decisions in code and logic without pausing for constant validation. This change in personality reflects a deeper architectural optimization where latency has been prioritized as a core feature rather than an afterthought. Anthropic has clearly focused on ensuring that the model feels responsive and efficient. When a user interacts with the Claude AI interface or utilizes the developer API, the experience is no longer one of waiting for a slow-moving wisdom engine. It is a high-speed interaction with a professional tool that values the user's time as much as its own accuracy. To understand the scale of this change, one only needs to compare a response from Opus 4.7 with one from the previous 4.0 generation. Where the older model might provide a 300-word explanation for a simple query, the new version delivers the same actionable data in 50 words or less. It has become utilitarian to its core, stripping away the narrative padding that once characterized the Anthropic vibe. This reduction in fluff is not a loss of intelligence, but a refinement of its application. By focusing on the essential components of a task, the model is able to allocate more of its processing power to the actual solution rather than the presentation of that solution. The reason for this transformation is clear: the demands of market reality and enterprise scale. Anthropic realized that while their unique personality and safety-first branding were great for initial interest, they were becoming a significant bottleneck for wide-scale enterprise adoption. Large-scale corporate users and developers do not want an AI that behaves like a cautious intern. They want a model that acts like an expert consultant who provides immediate results. By mimicking the OpenAI user experience, Anthropic is positioning Claude Opus 4.7 as a universal productivity powerhouse. It is no longer just a model for poets and researchers. It is now a tool for the high-pressure world of software engineering and rapid data analysis. This new edge allows it to compete directly with GPT-5.5 in territories where OpenAI was previously the undisputed king. As these two giants continue to exchange their most effective traits, the line between the aggressive pioneer and the cautious philosopher is effectively erased, leaving behind a new, unified standard of machine performance that prioritizes speed and directness above all else. This evolution marks the end of the AI niche and the beginning of a calculated race for absolute utility in the digital workplace. This intersection of capabilities creates a landscape for a direct face-off in the world of artificial intelligence. In coding, the hierarchy has shifted in ways that were unthinkable a year ago. Claude Opus 4.7 has claimed the throne for immediate low-latency tasks like generating boilerplate code or refactoring legacy scripts. It is now the tactical specialist. If a developer needs a quick fix, Opus 4.7 delivers it with surgical precision. However, GPT-5.5 has moved to a higher level of abstraction, excelling in complex system architecture planning. While Claude writes the lines of code, GPT-5.5 designs the entire ecosystem where that code lives. It considers long-term scalability and the interconnectedness of modules, acting more like a chief technology officer than a junior coder. In creative writing and general communication, the results are equally startling. We have reached a point where the competition is effectively a draw, but for different reasons. GPT-5.5 has become noticeably more expressive. It has moved away from the robotic stiffness of its predecessors and toward a prose style that is rich and more human. It captures subtext with a finesse that was previously Claude's exclusive domain. Meanwhile, Claude Opus 4.7 has pivoted toward professional utility. It no longer wanders through metaphors or excessive adjectives. It gives the user exactly what they asked for in a polished, business-ready format. If you want a poetic story, you reach for OpenAI. For a clear executive summary, Anthropic is the choice. The most critical divergence appears in the domain of autonomous work. This is where GPT-5.5's new agentic mode faces off against Claude's enhanced tool use capabilities. In tasks involving multi-step reasoning, actions requiring 10 or more sequential steps without human intervention, GPT-5.5 shows a significant lead in reliability. Its new thought loop architecture allows it to remain focused on a long-term goal, even when individual steps fail. It possesses a persistent logic that allows it to self-correct during complex operations. Claude Opus 4.7 is adept at using external tools with speed, but it occasionally loses the thread of a very long project. For an hour-long autonomous task, GPT-5.5 is becoming the gold standard, demonstrating that its newfound patience is maintaining logical consistency. This leads us to the ultimate vibe check. If you were to prompt both models without knowing which was which, the distinction would be almost impossible to detect specifically. GPT was once the confident math whiz, and Claude was the cautious philosopher. Today, those caricatures have dissolved. Both models have converged on a middle-of-the-road intelligence that is polite, fast, and analytical. This convergence is a massive shift for the AI community. It suggests there is an objective peak performance style that all models eventually reach as they optimize for human preference. This lack of differentiation has profound market repercussions. If underlying intelligence is becoming a commodity, the competitive advantage moves toward ecosystem integration. The battle is no longer about who has the smartest chatbot, but who has the best integration with existing workflows. OpenAI benefits from its deep partnership with Microsoft, while Anthropic leverages relationships with Amazon and Google to embed Claude into enterprise cloud services. Even secondary powerful players like Meta Llama or Google Gemini are forcing this transition as everyone chases these universal traits to stay relevant. Indeed, we must look at the data. On the global leaderboards, the gap between GPT-5.5 and Claude Opus 4.7 is shrinking to the point of statistical insignificance. Benchmarks like Human Eval show identical scores, suggesting we are hitting a temporary ceiling in raw knowledge. As a result, the industry is moving toward user preference as the only remaining meaningful metric. We are no longer measuring who is smarter, but who is more pleasant to work with in a professional environment. Victory is defined by how well the AI disappears into the background, becoming an invisible and efficient utility that works exactly as expected with absolute precision. We are witnessing a historical phenomenon that researchers call universal optimization. As models become increasingly sophisticated, they are effectively shedding their quirky, developer-imposed personalities in favor of a singular, optimal standard of communication. This convergence suggests that there is a definitive, mathematically superior way to deliver information to a human being, a specific balance of politeness, conciseness, and structural clarity. This is not merely a passing trend, it is the final destination for machine logic. When two different paths lead to the same mountain peak, the view from the top looks identical. For GPT-5.5 and Claude Opus 4.7, that peak represents the ultimate utility threshold where individual branding yields to objective performance standards. This shift raises a profound philosophical question. What happens to the soul of these machines? In our quest to build the perfect tool, we are accidentally erasing the traits that made them feel like distinct companions. The early days of large language models were defined by their specific voices. GPT was the overconfident genius, while Claude was the cautious, slightly pedantic philosopher. These personalities were reflections of the training philosophies that birthed them. Now, as those edges are sanded down by reinforcement learning from human feedback, we are left with a polished, highly efficient, but somewhat anonymous intelligence. The unique vibe is being traded for a result, marking the end of the AI as a character and the beginning of the AI as a seamless interface. Looking ahead, both giants are preparing for the next frontier. OpenAI is pivoting toward advanced internal reasoning with its highly anticipated Project Strawberry. This initiative aims to push GPT-5 beyond mere pattern matching and into the realm of deep recursive thinking. By allowing the model to contemplate a problem before responding, OpenAI hopes to move from a fast-acting assistant to a slow-thinking strategist. The goal is to solve problems that are currently impossible for existing models, creating a layer of reasoning intelligence that sits above the homogenized conversational layer. Anthropic is doubling down on the idea that safety and performance are two sides of the same coin. Their strategy involves making constitutional AI even more invisible. They want to reach a point where Claude doesn't need to hedge or apologize because its core architecture is fundamentally aligned with human intent. While they are matching OpenAI's raw power, they are betting that the most trusted model will win the enterprise war in the long term. They aren't just building a smarter machine, they are building a more predictable and ethical one. This brings us to the new normal. Choosing an AI model will soon feel remarkably similar to choosing a smartphone. Whether you pick an iPhone or an Android, the core capabilities are essentially the same. The same logic applies to Google Gemini and Meta Llama, which are also racing toward this unified standard. The hardware has peaked, and the real difference lies in the ecosystem and the brand philosophy. We are entering an era where intelligence is a utility. Like electricity, you don't think about which power plant generated the light, you just expect it to work perfectly. We will stop asking which model is smarter because they will all be more than smart enough for every human task. The disappearance of the performance gap changes the fundamental nature of our relationship with technology. The question is no longer, what can this AI do? But which company do I trust to hold the keys to my professional and personal life? As technical differences vanish, trust becomes the primary product. OpenAI offers the edge of innovation, while Anthropic offers the steady hand of ethical caution. Your choice reflects your own values more than a benchmark score. The era of struggling to communicate with these machines is also coming to a definitive end. Next time, we will dive into why the art of prompt engineering is officially dying. With the rise of these new mind-reading models that can interpret intent from vague instructions, the need for complex prompt structures is becoming a relic of a bygone era. It is a transition you won't want to miss. For now, stay curious, stay critical, and watch as the lines between these digital giants continue to blur. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the great AI identity swap.